projects that George Mason faculty have engaged in using raw data such as words, documentary sources, and content of media newscasts such as television programs. For each project, I will touch on some of the findings that in order, or rather to give you a sense about what these scholars are interested in and how they do their work. And at the very end, I'm going to offer some concluding thoughts that I hope fall within the purpose of this afternoon's session. So the projects that I'm going to cover come from two research centers at George Mason University. The first one is the Center for History and New Media, which is named after Roy Rosenzweig. Roy founded the center in the late 1990s, and he was a noted social historian who also really pioneered in the field of what is now known as digital humanities. The projects that I will talk about is Reframing the Victorians, Criminal Intent, and Poison. The other center is the Center for Media and Public Affairs, and that's an organization that does research in educational programming. It is part of Mason, but it also has a separate legal status. They do work in a range of topics from U.S. presidential elections, international media, international affairs, science and health reporting, entertainment studies, and religion in the media. So Reframing the Victorians is a project that was funded by Google, and it looks at the Google database. It's a study that looks at Houghton's classic book that was published in the 1950s, and they're attempting to find out whether the famous accounts that Houghton provided about that period with respect to the mindset and other attributes of the period may hold up against the 1.5 million or so volumes that were published in English in the United Kingdom between the late part of the 18th century into the early 20th century. So they have searched for keywords in their experiments, and they have gone beyond Google's Ngram viewer, which traces the frequency of words in print over time with little context or transparency or the opportunity to interact with the data. So that's the first cut. Then the second cut is they produce these grids in order to engage in human review. And even that aspect of refining the study or the data uses computational processes. In this particular case, they used MySQL queries to get into the meaning of the words in context more deeply. So Houghton used words like hope, faith, and heroic to describe the character of the Victorian period. And as you can see here, it shows the frequency that these words have appeared in publications between this period of time. For those of you that are historians or literary people and understand the Victorian period well, you will recognize that there was the so-called Victorian crisis of faith. So they specifically looked at two words, God and Christian. And God appears in 1.2% of all books titles in the mid-1950s, but it drops to just 1/3 of 1% of titles by World War I. And I hope the large slide shows that you can follow the chronology. Christian in title speaks to about out of 50 books in 1841, and then drops to 1 out of 250 in 1913. Drilling a little bit deeper, they looked at words Jesus and Christ. And here, the comparison is that Jesus is somewhat less secular, and it appears in a relatively constant rate, with some reduction between 1817 and 1890. But the frequency of titles with the more religiously identified word Christ drops by a remarkable 3/4 by the mid-19th century. So what does all this mean? The graphs that I have briefly shown you enable these historians to look at different sources and to synthesize, and by doing so, it may lead to new insights or even new knowledge, or very minimally to a confirmation and greater understanding of a particular topic. For instance, in comparing literature and court cases of the Old Bailey, the project that I'll discuss next, the two principal investigators in this, Cohen and Gibbs, found that, quote, descriptions of failed marriages in literature rose in parallel with male bigamy trials, and approximately 2 decades in advance of the increase in female bigamy trials, a phenomenon, they say, that could use further analysis through closer reading. The next project I want to highlight is the Old Bailey, and they have dubbed this particular project as the criminal intent. The proceedings of the Old Bailey provide searchable digitized records of London's Central Criminal Court. The database was created through a collaboration between several British universities and funding entities. The international team working on this project includes scholars in Great Britain, the United States, and Canada. Search queries of the Old Bailey site are handled by the UK team. The different result sets are saved into Zotero library, that is the software that is used to create libraries for management purposes, and which is done at Mason, and the results from Zotero are then sent to the Canadian team, where they do visualization using tools such as Voyeur. So the Old Bailey's 125 million words of accurately transcribed historical text contains a myriad of unusual and compelling stories. By using the tools that go beyond reading individual trials, the project aimed to construct a way to zoom out to look at statistically significant patterns in the data, and to zoom in so to be able to consider the cases themselves. So coming back to the subject of female bigamy, using intergrade tools makes broader historical phenomena more visible. For example, Dan Cohen looked at female agency in the 19th century, extracting legal cases that involved women and analyzing them in Voyeur. He leveraged the scale of the proceedings of the Old Bailey and the organization of Zotero and visualization of Voyeur, and the separate data warehouse that was developed to trace the rise of greater latitude in female behavior in the late Victorian period. By taking part of the Old Bailey involving bigamy and using the data warehousing charting tool, as these graphs depict, he could see a significant rise of women taking on other spouses when their husbands left them. This is another way of looking at the data, specifically the trials in Zotero database, information about the trials in the database, and it became clear that these late Victorian women were not receiving significant punishment for the action of bigamy as they did earlier in the century. This successfully matched the results of another study that was done and was funded by the NIH that had shown a sharp rise in mentions of loveless marriages after around 1870. The previous presenters showed actively how data moves. And if one were to go to digraph application by moving the cursor, and I hope it shows up, that's that particular data point that I referred to earlier, you see the data moving across the screen, which is making data live, I suppose. So that's the Old Bailey project and text mining applications relating to it. The next thing I want to make a brief mention about is study of poison, and that is done by Fred Gibbs. Fred Gibbs is trained as a historian of science, so he just concluded work looking at poison using books from northern Italy and southern France, 14th to 16th centuries, as well as original sources, manuscripts in this case, that were published. I don't have any findings to report about this because he's completing a monograph, and it's going to probably be his work coming up for tenure. But what's interesting about this is unlike other scholars who, as part of their work, create faculty papers on this subject or that paper, in his case, he started a database on the subject, and he's working to secure funding in order to leverage it into a large-scale database that other scholars from different parts of the world can contribute to. Now, another connection with poison is the last bullet there where it says beware of the coffee, poison in the Old Bailey records. So what Fred did was to identify 400 records in the Old Bailey that contain the word poison. He then analyzed them in Voyeur to get a sense of what was going on with those particular records in the context of poison. In doing so, he noticed that the word drank was one of the common words to appear in the search results. Zeroing in on the context of drank, one of the words most commonly appearing nearby was coffee. So it was no surprise to Gibbs that, quote, a strong, bitter drink would be a vehicle for administration of poison. Or perhaps the cheap coffee tasted so bad that someone, having fallen ill for any reason after drinking coffee, would feel that they had been poisoned. Next, I want to move to the work being done by the Center for Media and Public Affairs. By the way, I should have mentioned that the Rosenwald Center are the people that have brought our community Zotero, Omeka, among many other contributions. In the case of the Media and Public Affairs Center, it is an entity that is acknowledged for its preeminent work in news analysis and as journalism's premier watchdog. They do work on behalf of foundations, occasionally for industry groups, but never for individual companies, and of course for their own ongoing scholarly activities. According to its longtime director, quote, our scientific approach sets us apart from self-appointed media watchdog groups, while our timeliness and outreach distinguish us from traditional academic researchers. So, what do they do? This slide was created to show how the center works with raw data. They download various television broadcasts, and this graphic kind of depicts that activity. It's somewhat inexpensive way of doing things, given the funding sources to support their operations. They say it works just fine for them. They're not doing any archiving in the sense that we understand it. The archiving they do is only to support their own work. So they're not in the business as, say, the Vanderbilt Television Archive is in other activities found elsewhere. In their case, their most valuable data are the data sets and associated code books that derive from each of these studies. In those cases, standing talking with them, the data sets are stored digitally, and the code books are both in print as well as digital formats. They're engaged in social science coding. They work, depending on the subject they're studying, they start with their initial data is, besides the images and the audio, they are starting with closed captioning, then they review that for accuracy and completeness, and they add context to that material. So text in the end serves as their primary data source. They then work with coders, especially trained to look at various elements that they wish to study. In every case, they use at least 2 coders. Depending on the subject, they may use as many as 5 coders. They aim for inter-coder reliability of at least 85%. Very often they are able to go as high as 90%, which is not bad for social science subjects. So one recent study that they conducted was about the then new President Barack Obama and how it fared in the international news. This analysis involved tabulating individual statements during evening newscasts that explain contained explicitly positive or negative judgments. And those were done at the statement level because, in their experience, the statement level, which usually consists of a sentence or two, offers more ambiguity as a level or as a unit of analysis, and it has a much higher intercoder reliability than looking at the story level and doing story level assessments. So in this particular case, they looked at programs in the United Kingdom, Germany, the Middle East, as well as the United States. As I explained earlier, they proceeded with content analysis. They looked at various reports linking Obama to different areas of evaluation, and as well as character, capacity to govern, as well as the U.S. standing in international politics, and particularly with respect to the Middle East. So, how did Obama do on the question of ability to govern? Tuareg media often viewed as particularly critical of the United States, Al-Manar and Al Jazeera were the most positive outlets in their assessment of Obama's capacity to govern. Also, the 2 German outlets were positive in this regard. American broadcasters were to varying degrees not positive, as were both of the British outlets. On the dimension of international issues, which is one of Obama's presidency important foci, they found out that the 4 European outlets were quite positive about Americans' global prospects. The most positive outlet was Al Jazeera, followed by ABC News. 2 other U.S. broadcasters provided roughly neutral coverage of this Obama topic, as did the other Arab outlets. And anyone following U.S. politics knows that Fox News, which reflects political cleavages in the country, was the most negative. One other thing that I would like to highlight about the work at this center is the political humor activity that has been going on since the tracking of, I should say, since the 1988. They have been tracking the Tonight Show, David Letterman, later on O'Brien, Daily Show, the Colbert Report. And this is one of the most revisited data sets. It's a type of scorecard that they keep on an ongoing basis on their website. So one, for example, could find that when Jay Leno initially hosted the Tonight Show, he told more than 33,000 jokes about public figures, and his favorite target was Bill Clinton. In the work of this center, based on the various studies they have conducted, other scholars come to them to ask for reviews or clarifications or to dig into data further to answer specific questions that might arise. And that's where they fulfill, if you will, a library function for that community. Because their studies result always in data sets, and the data sets are saved, they're able to go back and extract data to inform or answer the different questions. And that is happening a lot. It's happening with graduate students, it's happening with scholars, and it's happening even with foundations or industry groups who are interested in whether their messages are reaching intended audiences, how often their viewpoints about public, social, etc. issues are mentioned in the various media and so forth. So they serve that function, that purpose. And before I get to my concluding remarks, with respect to the library, we are collaborating with the Center for History and New Media. When they complete their work entirely, that digital corpora comes to the university libraries, and that it becomes part of our institutional repository. So the agreement is the library serves as the archival site for that kind of work. With respect to this center, we do not have that kind of relationship, not yet anyway. So let me conclude this brief talk by putting forth some thoughts that you can see here. Certainly in the humanities and the social sciences, we see work that is being conducted not by the single solitary scholar working in the library, in the office, or the laboratory, but rather by teams, often across borders. So in some ways, humanities and social sciences are moving in the direction that the physical sciences have done for a long time, which is studying big questions with a lot of scholars throughout the world. The data that is processed and studied may result in the creation of data sets. And those data sets certainly are part of the scholarly record, and furthermore, they of use well into the future. There are challenges that have been expressed, especially by the people working in the digital humanities, which is how different sets of collections, databases, data sets, etc. connect, and is it a metadata problem? Fred Gibbs, for example, recently posted on his blog that it is no longer fruitful to be thinking in a binary manner, that there are producers and consumers of information, that both the producer as well as the consumer are one and the same. And his point was that it should be scholars that are knowledgeable in these areas that should have and should undertake responsibility for creation of metadata so that that material can be accessed. So in terms of the library, especially at the university research library level, this is an evolving environment. The previous speakers addressed that in their presentation. And to my mind, there are organizational, there are facilitative, and there are educational dimensions to the role that the library could play. At a more basic level at this point is how can libraries assist the non-experts to get started, whether getting started has to do with the access tools, with the mining tools, computational tools, and the question is, will they? So I want to finish by saying that the work I presented here did not involve the libraries at my university, and for that matter, it did not involve the central IT organization. The raw data that the researchers used came from outside sources, or it was created by the researchers themselves. Of course, the library provides access and materials, access to research materials, and supports these researchers in related ways, but we had nothing to do with those specific studies as such. Peripherally, at my institution at least, we are aware of these activities and the need to support them. So we took certain steps. We joined the In Common Federation so that researchers can collaborate with others across institutional borders through Shibboleth. We support free Zotero storage for researchers. We fund that activity centrally. And within the library, we have organized the Data Management Service Group to begin supporting such activities among the faculty and students at George Mason University. So with that, I will stop here. Thank you.